following video contains content that may be disturbing to some viewers. Topics include graphic discussions of crime, violence, and sensitive subject matter. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. We sat down with Jen Wood of Fitz News for an update in the Jessica Barnes case after one of the defendants in the case asked the court for reconsideration for bond. Kendall Mims was arrested on October 1st and charged with misprision of a felony, accessory after the fact, and obstruction of justice. A magistrate in the case previously denied bond for Kendall. Jen Wood was in court with the victim's family, where the judge heard from prosecutors in the case as well as Mims' family. She has followed this case from the beginning, and her exclusive reporting in this case has helped give Jessica Barnes and other alleged victims a voice.
All right, Jen, we're back to talk about the Jessica Barnes case. Yesterday, you actually appeared in a reconsideration for bond hearing that Kendall Mims filed in this case. So I want to go through some of the things that happened yesterday in court. We learned some new information yesterday in court. So you traveled there yesterday to, where was that, in Anderson?
Yep, it was in Anderson, at the Anderson County Courthouse, which is a huge, beautiful building. I've not been there before.
Who all was there yesterday?
The courtroom was packed, and I wasn't sure initially if it was all for Kendall, or related to Jessica Barnes' case. But there were quite a few other defendants waiting to have motions heard. So I think it was a mixture. There were a lot of individuals there for Kendall's bond hearing. I think she had about 6 family members plus her attorney. And then, on Jessica's side, her mother, Cecilia, was there, along with Chief Crosby from Pendleton Police Department and a victim's advocate. And I believe it was Cecilia's sister.
Okay. So Kendall has been charged as well as Victoria, but this hearing was just for Kendall. Kendall's charged with misprision of a felony, accessory after the fact, and obstruction of justice. All 3 of those are felony charges, right?
Correct. And they misprision, a lot of people are like, what is that? I'd never actually heard that word before they charged them with this. It's basically just failure to report.
Okay. So we know that on July 31st, that Jessica tried to get away. She basically was fed up. She had enough. And we know that she went back to her mom's house. And then later that night, or while she was moving back to her mom's house, she ended up going to the hospital. And they basically discharged her, or she was not seen, and left on her own, and called back up with Brandon. And so she's seen on a video camera the very next day on her mom's front porch getting her items back. And Brandon, who actually was on trespass notice from her mom's house, was seen, parked on the road while she was getting her things. The day after that, we learned that Brandon strangled her with his arms, and Victoria watched. So I know that we learned new information yesterday in court. But what did they say that Kendall's role was in this crime, allegedly?
So the prosecution was, I think they held back quite a bit, but they did release enough information to give the judge a sense of why they did not believe that Kendall should be out on bond. And part of that was that they believed that she participated in getting rid of Jessica's body, disposing of it. They specifically said that she had served as a lookout, which I thought that was the first time I'd heard that.
Well, it was also the first time that we heard that she had been burned. They said in a plastic tote, and that she had been burned completely.
Dead. Jessica Barnes was found in September, more than a month after investigators said she was last seen. Her body was found burned in a plastic tote near Lake Hartwell. On October 1st, officials announced her husband, Brandon Barnes, and their 2 roommates, Kendall Mims and Victoria Tibbet, were all arrested. Brandon Barnes is charged with murder. Tibbet and Mims were charged with accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. All 3 were initially denied bond in their first court appearance, but Mims filed a new request over a month ago, asking a judge to reconsider.
Fox Carolina, the only news station in the courtroom today as the judge considered her request. We heard from both the state and Mims' defense, along with several family members who spoke in support of letting her out. Mims' mother, father, and grandfather all spoke, saying she has a baby and needs to be out of jail to care for the child. Her family members described Brandon Barnes as a, quote, monster, saying he abused both Mims and Jessica. They claim he cut Mims off from the rest of her family, was violent with her and controlling. They said their thoughts are with Jessica's family, but said Mims is a victim as well and did what she had to do in order to survive.
I knew from the very start that Brandon was pure poison, and we did everything in our power to keep him from taking her from our loving family. He was instead a thief who came to steal, kill, and destroy. He did that.
The state, though, pushed back and told a judge Mims needs to stay in jail. A representative from the solicitor's office said Jessica's body was fully burned, and Mims acted as a lookout while that happened and directly helped hide Jessica's body. The state also said Mims and the other suspects fled to Colorado after Jessica was killed. They agreed that Brandon Barnes was abusive. However, the state said it does not excuse Mims' alleged actions.
The state, based on everything we know, everything we've gathered from law enforcement, everything they've said about Mr. Barnes, we don't dispute that. And we agree that it's a terribly tragic, terrible situation. And the men seem like a good family, but it still doesn't excuse the fact a citizen concealed a murder victim, Jessica Barnes, is dead for almost 2 months.
And Jessica's family and the investigators on the case were in court today, but did not address the judge. The judge decided to deny Mims' bond today, but said he will revisit it in 90 days.
Those are the words that they used.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, I don't think any of that fortunately came as a surprise to Jessica's mother, but I still don't think it was any less difficult to hear.
Yeah, so they conducted a search warrant on the day that there was also a prayer vigil. And at that time, the three of them, Kendall, Victoria, and Brandon, had actually taken a road trip to Colorado, just out of the blue, with the baby. So we know that they had served a search warrant over off of Twin Lakes Road near Lake Hartwell. And we know that there's a path that goes down to a rock quarry there. That's actually where Brandon and Jessica met for the first time. So they had some history there. And that is actually where they disposed of her body. Her remains were found in that location. So we also know you've done some interviews, or you did an interview with Brian Bennett, a strangulation expert in South Carolina. And there's a bill in our legislative right now for a law around.
Yeah, it was pre-filed just this week. So it's very, very exciting.
Well, it is. And this case is very unfortunate, but the timing of this case and that bill kind of have collided in a way that it's kind of being used to advance that bill and expose some of the things that go along with strangulation. We know that Kendall's had some health problems while she's been incarcerated. This is something that you've told me about. You sat down with her family. So what have you I know we started in this case together on the Jessica Barnes part, but then you've now met with Kendall's family and have almost a different perspective or a new perspective. Tell me about that.
It definitely made me think about this case not a little, like very deeply. Jessica's mother, she is just one of the kindest, most graceful women I've ever met. And interviewing her after the murder was just one of the highlights of my career. Just her strength and her bravery were so impressive. And she gave me a really good sense of who Brandon Barnes was in that how he controlled her daughter's life, how, the alleged abuse that she saw him perpetrate against her daughter. So when I met with Kendall's parents, it was it was very hard. I don't know what I expected. I don't know if I must have expected something because I was surprised just at how sweet and kind and very, very normal they were. You know, they have a 20-year-old daughter. I have an 18-year-old daughter. I mean, and Teresa, Kendall's mom, reminded me so much of Cecilia. You know, they're very spiritual people. Kendall's father, Marcus, is a preacher, or pastor. I'm not sure his exact title. And like Jessica's mother, they were very involved in their daughter's life. So when Brandon Barnes entered their daughter's life, it went south fast, like faster than, I mean, I think Kendall and Jessica were both very sheltered young ladies. You know, their parents were very involved in their upbringing, they had rules. You know, I don't think they were overly strict, but they had very clear rules and expectations for their children. And I think, from the time Brandon met Kendall, which I'd like to point out was February, Super Bowl weekend, um, 2023, was 4 months after his former girlfriend, who I also interviewed, escaped from him. So, I mean, he moved on very quickly. But he met her in February 2023, and within 2 weeks, Kendall's parents thought that they would have time. They didn't like him. They didn't feel good about the relationship. They thought they would have time to talk some sense into her. And before they knew it, they had taken off for Georgia in Kendall's car, and they had to file, missing persons reports. I mean, it was just like they didn't see it coming. It happened so fast that, like they said, it's not, you don't expect evil to walk into your life.
Yeah,
Um,
I know that you've sat through many versions of this story with the same, like with Brandon Barnes. So I know by the time you got to Kendall's parents, you also were kind of frustrated, and me too. And I think everybody who's heard this story is like, how does this happen? But you've pointed out that Kendall's parents, they did everything. You said they did everything that you would have done with.
yeah, when I listen to stories like this, I'm often thinking, I try to listen from a mom's perspective, specifically when it does involve, a child. And, I was trying to think like, well, what would I've done? Would I've done this differently? And I couldn't, every step that they took was a step that I would have taken. It's not like I would have, there were any steps that I thought they didn't take. They did everything. They practiced tough love. When they realized they couldn't get her out, they tried to get her at least somewhere where they would know she was safe, which would be her grandfather's pool house in Pendleton, where Jessica ultimately lost her life.
And he was there in
Um,
court also, right? Ron Heron,
yeah. Oh,
grandfather.
Ron, Mr. Ron Heron, who I think is definitively the superhero in this case, was in court and at the meeting, and just, I mean, he's so sweet. He's just the sweetest man, and they were all doing everything they could to ensure Kendall was safe because they knew that the situation she was in was dangerous, and they were afraid that, if they lost sight of her, if, they did something to scare Brandon off, they would never know what happened. Their daughter would disappear, and they would never know what would happen.
So they had to give in order to keep,
Hmm.
surveillance and in contact. And so the other thing is, I mean, of course, I think the whole town of Pendleton would vote Ron for mayor if that option ever became available. He is a great guy. Even his neighbors talk about how, he goes around and helps people every year. He, helps people do their taxes. And he's just a really nice guy and always willing to help. The community really loves him there. He's 82 years old, right?
82. I mean, I was telling Chief Crosby in court yesterday, I was like, Ron got up to speak, and he got up, and I was like, I tell you what, I would fight a drunk tiger for Ron. Like, he is just, one of those guys that if he would adopt me as a granddaughter, I'd take it.
Yeah. Well, and he has now taken on the responsibility of caring for the baby that
Yes.
Kendall has with Brandon. And the baby's, what, nearly a year old now, right?
Nearly
Almost.
a year old. They're trying to keep as much about the baby private as possible, just to protect her. I mean, I think this is just so much for them. But yes, she's under a year. She is beautiful.
She
It's
is
like
gorgeous.
absolutely beautiful.
Well, I'm so glad that she's with Ron and that you know, they're able to have her and everything. She's safe, and we certainly were concerned when she was in this situation, but she is safe now. And now Kendall is experiencing health issues while she's incarcerated. Have those been addressed, or are they?
Oh, so when I was talking to Teresa and Kendall's family, Teresa, just gotten off the phone with Kendall, and noted that she'd been, she's like, I'm sorry, she's been having some health problems. And I was like, oh, that's, horrible. What's going on? And she was talking about how she had lost feeling in her right hand and foot. And, it was just, it was just stuff that didn't make sense for an otherwise healthy 20-year-old. The jail staff, medical staff in the jail had evaluated her, and they believed it was due to stress. Um, I remember calling you on the way home and I was like, mentioned it and you're like, remember that interview you did with Brian Bennett? And I was like, oh, because those symptoms feel very stroke-like. Um, and we know Brandon allegedly has a history of strangulation of his partners. They had found in their evaluation some narrowing of the arteries in the artery in Kendall's neck. Um,
This is
and
so serious.
yeah, very serious. So, I mean, I think, so I immediately called Teresa and said, hey, I need you to mention to the jail staff that there is a possibility she has been the victim of strangulation and that there's a possibility that this is a delayed onset injury. And Brian Bennett very quickly provided me some information regarding that type of that type of injury, so she could get it to the jail staff so they would understand the seriousness of it. But what happens is that artery, when there is a violent strangulation, the artery can tear, and it can cause instant death. It can cause serious injuries. Brian said, it's always possibility that it tore and healed back up and it healed incorrectly and the scar tissue narrowed that artery.
Oh, wow.
So it can cause a stroke eventually. We're talking about these, giant arteries from, your heart to your brain. So yeah, it is a very serious injury. And she, jail referred her to neurology that can take up to 60 days. And
But
I
what
think
what
given,
Brian said in the interview was that a forensic exam needs to take place in order to see some of this stuff because you can't obviously see it on the skin. So they
right.
really should do, in depth.
Right. And, I think, in addition to that, as part of that motion for bond that was heard yesterday, I think her lawyer and, her parents are both hoping that in addition to getting the medical care that I think she so desperately needs, um, you know, regardless of the facts of this case, what comes out, I think this is a very young woman who lived in a very abusive and controlling situation, and she needs some serious mental health care as well. And, they do get that to them in jail, but it is absolutely not to the extent that I think Kendall needs.
So we learned so much in strangulation, and I mean, this conversation is it
Yeah,
could
you and I
be
could talk for hours about
a
the
hundred
psychology
episodes.
behind it. And
There's so much to think about, but with the law pre-filed or the bill
Mhm.
pre-filed to make it law um, for non-fatal strangulation cases, there's there's been situations where Brandon could have been stopped before from ever being able to do this again. So this is really important that we get this law in South Carolina. And when you listen to the symptoms that she's having and you hear the interview with Brian, it's like you could just put her face on it. I mean, it's
Right, right. And yeah, I don't know why it took me. Yeah, I remember sitting there thinking to myself when I was speaking with them, like I was thinking this doesn't seem right. But I just remember thinking it, and then I'm talking to you, and it was like ding, like instant. I'm like, I gotta hang up. Like it was just, thank God I mentioned it.
yeah, I've been really worried about her as well as her mental health. You said they get some sort of mental health services while
Mhm.
they're incarcerated. I don't know what those look like, but
Me
certainly
either.
she needs like trauma-based therapy probably and things that are really intense. And
You
I'm
know,
not sure if she's treated more like a victim in this case or a criminal or both.
and like you said, two things can be true at once. I mean, I it hurts my heart listening to what her family says she went through, and I have a hard time not believing it because I talked to Catherine, his ex-girlfriend, about what she went through, and I talked to Jessica's mother about what Jessica went through. I mean, I'm not entirely sure why, clearly it's allegedly, but you know, I- that
Well, you've spoken with a victim
right,
of a case that he was convicted in.
right,
So
right.
it's not all allegedly.
Right. But in terms of what Kendall went through, I very much think it's credible. I think it's very sad.
Well, her mom spoke in court, Teresa Mims, and she said her sweet daughter was also a victim who happened to survive this monster and his path of destruction. And then she detailed that over the past year and a half, she's watched Brandon love on her daughter and slowly slip away her life as if he had a noose around her neck. And pulled it so tightly until she was just a shell of a human. And you see in court how she keeps her head down. Um, and I asked you, do you think that's like shame or guilt? Or do you think it's embarrassment? Or is she just like, is that just how she would act in a grocery store? Would she, like, is she that
Her parents said that,
traumatized?
she was never like an overly forward child. Teresa noted that she always had to kind of push her to advocate for herself, when she was younger. And that's something as a mom, I've had to do. I tell my kids, I can't always be be your voice. You need to speak up at school if something's happening. I'm always willing to be, but it is okay to say something's bothering you, you need help with something. And she said that that was something that, she had to do often with Kendall. So she was quieter, but not like this. She was always, very goal oriented. She graduated with a 3.8, cum laude. Can't even say it right because I wasn't that.
So, yeah, she is very quiet. When I
And
actually met her the night that I met them, before they were apprehended, she was quiet as a mouse, I would say.
And after the hearing, Cecilia and I were talking outside of court, and I noted how, Cecilia has a lot of empathy. And bless her. I mean, she's just wonderful. She has so much empathy for Kendall's parents and for Kendall. And I mentioned how, her head was down, and, her shoulders were slumped, and she said, in the year that she knew her, that's how she was. She said she had only heard her really speak one time, um, and it was when, after the baby was born, she asked if she could hold the baby. No, it was in July. She asked if she could hold the baby, and Kendall said, I need to ask Brandon if that's okay. And Cecilia said, why do you need to ask him? It's your baby too. And she said, that's it. That's the only time I ever heard her speak.
I know she's very smart. She wanted to be, well, she told me what she wanted to do was go back to school. And her plan was to move back to North Carolina with the baby, to go back to school, and she wanted to make prosthetic devices for veterans, I believe.
Yep.
So she's smart, and so it just leads back to Brennan has a type, and it's usually, he talks Jesus to these girls, he talks sweet to their parents. He's done these weird things like calling their parents and asking, can he marry them? And it's all just absurd, and we're both sick of it. We have
Yeah, well,
just
Marcus said that he had called, I think it's in July. They had filed for their marriage license in July 2023, never went through with it, which I think her parents are very, very happy about. But he had called and asked Marcus for permission to marry his daughter. And Marcus said, I think it's the only time I heard him swear the entire time. And he was like, hell no. Like,
Yeah,
no,
I
like,
would
go away.
I would
Are
do
you nuts?
everything, and these parents they've done everything they can. They've had to change their locks, and they've been worried about Brennan threatening them. I've heard phone calls and messages where Brennan has threatened Cecilia's family as well. He does the same thing, allegedly, everywhere he goes. So um, they're young. They're so young, and
And
we have
I
kids
think
this
they
age.
seem naive too. Like, some kids are a little more worldly, a little more, apt to speak up if they're not comfortable with the situation. But, in all of the people I've spoken to that got entrapped by him, in his snare, they were all just kind of very religious, very naive, somewhat sheltered young ladies. And I think he just finds that and preys on it.
It gives him some bit of trust or like authenticity. Like if he's going for that and he's talking his Jesus talk and all that, then they trust him. I think that's his like concept of manipulation. And he doesn't just manipulate the partner, like he manipulates the whole family until they catch on, and then he plucks the girl out of the family and
Yeah, it
takes off.
feels like there is a very clear MO in this case. And I think it might have been you and I talking about this. I mean, I wholeheartedly believe that had he not been caught and arrested in Jessica's murder, that this wouldn't have been the end of his criminal career.
Well, and we don't even know if this is where it started.
Yeah, that's another thing that I'm digging very deeply into.
Well, I mean, if anybody knows anything, please let us know. I mean, for sure, because he has developed a skill. This has been so revealing to us, and I think that's why one of the reasons why it's like captured us and we've latched onto it so much is it's fascinating to pick up on all the little pieces that and to understand like why people act how they do that are in these situations, why their families have to put up walls but build in a little window. Um, there's things and ways that you have to operate that, that's why I worry so much about the victim part of this. If Victoria, so there's a lot to be determined. I mean, I've said that there's a reason that they decided to charge Kendall
Right.
with a crime. Now, and I've said two things could be true at once. So, she could also be a victim, or her victimization could have led to her crime. Who knows? I'm sure all that'll come out in court. But in the meantime, she is being held. Her bond is doubled now, twice it's been denied. Didn't they say she could reconsider for bond or ask for reconsideration again in 90 days?
Yeah, Judge Browse. He appeared to be, he was very respectful, listening to all the parties. And, after he heard all of the arguments, he took a few minutes to really, he was clearly looking at what had been submitted and considering it. I thought he was very contemplative over this decision, but said, he asked specifically if all of the evidence that's led and the solicitor's office had come back in yet, specifically referring to cellular forensic data. And he said, I think they said video. And it is not. So I think they're, waiting for the Celebrate reports to come back. They're waiting for analysis of some video evidence. I don't know specifically what that is. But he said, he just, in terms of Kendall's danger to the community if released, he wasn't comfortable making that decision until he knew the scope of the evidence that was going to be presented at trial. And I guess I can see that.
Well, I don't
And
think she's a danger to the community.
I mean, I've said this probably 15 times in the past day, but even Alex Murdaugh, who, murdered his wife and son, staged just suicide or attempted murder on the side of the road as a suicide attempt, stole $10 million. He got a $2 million bond. He couldn't afford it. They knew he couldn't afford it. He didn't get out, but he got a bond. But he said, he would be willing to reconsider it if they filed another motion in 90 days, if there was more evidence available.
Well, him not seeing the evidence or having it before him, if I was a judge, I would have a hard time letting somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I
on bond.
could appreciate that.
Yeah.
As a community member, it was like, okay, well, I would be complaining typically if they let somebody out on bond without all of, I would typically go the other way, So yeah, I was definitely, I did appreciate that side of what he was saying.
Her family, how are they? Were they upset?
They afterwards, I always try to give them space, but I did see them in the hallway afterwards, and they're devastated. I mean, her dad was sobbing. I gave him a quick hug, and they were talking to the lawyer, so I didn't want to interrupt what was being said or feel like I was listening in. So I just gave him a quick hug and told him I was praying for him, and got out of there. But they're devastated. I think they, Ron's raising the baby alone. They were hoping Kendall could get out and help with the baby. Her mom said, Brandon controlled every aspect of Kendall's life, according to her mom, and from her grandfather and just about everybody else I've talked, even Cecilia, but including her being a mother. He didn't want her to breastfeed. He told her who could hold the baby, told her where she could bring the baby.
Wasn't there something about when she was born or in labor and delivery?
Oh yeah, her mom said that when she was in labor, now Brandon banned Marcus and Teresa and Ron from the delivery room in the hospital. But afterwards, Brandon was very proud to say that he told Kendall she couldn't make any noise during labor, and she didn't. And Teresa said, Teresa had triplets.
And she's tiny, by the way. She literally looks like a little child from a distance. She's a little girl.
She's very, very, very petite. And Kendall's mom was like, that is not normal. Like, what is happening? I mean, he controlled every aspect. And I think they were really, hopeful that, in addition to getting medical care and mental health care, Kendall could, get a chance to be a mom for the first time on her terms.
This word monster, it's in all of our, if you research our documents for the word monster, I'm sure it would appear 100 times because it has been said by everybody in this case.
Every person. It's anybody who, I was sitting, I was sitting in the front row next to Chief Crosby and Cecilia yesterday, and an attorney was there for another case sitting next to me. And after the hearing had concluded, the attorney looked at me and he was like, whoa, this case is something. I was like, yeah, it's a lot.
It's wild, and it weighs on you.
I think about it a lot, and I think about it, my heart hurts for Jessica's family. My heart hurts for Kendall's family. I'm a tough cookie. Like, I'm one of those people that, it takes a lot to get to me. And, Ron was talking to me in our interview and told me about, one time when he walked outside of his home, the pool house is right in the backyard. he said he walked outside and could hear Brandon just screaming and swearing at Kendall. And he said he had just had enough and went in there and said, "You do not speak to my granddaughter like that." And he started shaking and just started sobbing. And I could just feel tears rolling down my cheeks. And I was like, what is happening? I was like, oh my God. It was just, you can kind of like when you hear a story that you can physically feel the person's pain and sorrow. And I could. And he said the next day, Brandon, or no, it was the next week. I think he said Brandon walked by and he said, "You're lucky you're alive, old man." And I could hear him saying it. I mean,
I was waiting on you to finish so I could say I totally could hear him saying those exact words from all the
and
things we've heard him, how he reacts in those words specifically. Yep.
yeah, and I mean, I, according to them, Brandon threatened Kendall, if she left, she would kill her grandfather. He would kill the baby. He would kill her family. The threats, according to them, were frequent. They were always used as leverage. And Ron said, everybody's like, "Why didn't you evict him?" And he said he did talk to the police chief about evicting him, but the concern was if he evicted Brandon,
He
Kendall
would
would
go.
end up with him with the baby and they wouldn't know where he was anymore. They wouldn't know where they were. And he said at least when they were in the pool house, he saw her going to and from work every day. He knew that she was alive,
When you
you
have
know?
kids this age, I mean, you let them go and you let them do, and they're gonna make their decisions, but you
Right.
still keep like finger length away and then arm's length, and then, until they're like way past the age of 18 or adulthood. This family tried to do that. They, in a way, lost their daughter too. I mean, unfortunately, to like jail,
Right.
um, but we don't know because we haven't seen all the evidence. So you and I are so on the fence, and I'm sure other people are.
So I've saw I do feel bad because I think she, in my opinion, went through hell. I think
Yeah,
she,
I feel bad too for her.
but I also am very, very well aware that in stories like this, there are things that are going to come out in court in the process of the trial that may may change things a little.
Well, and we also understand some of the things that we've seen in this case in probably a different way than jurors or, even possibly the judge. I don't know how much education the judge has on strangulation, but like there's a lot to really consider and look deeper at. This isn't just another court docket number. I mean,
I
this
have to
is
say
her
the
life.
judge was an older
Yeah.
man. And he actually, to me, almost, I'm trying to think of his face, but like I remember feeling as though I could see
He was
what he was
engaged.
staring was physically I could see it like visibly kind of affecting him. Like he was usually they're kind of stone faced, but I do remember a few points where I felt like I caught glimpses of some real empathy. Like it's a hard story to listen to.
Well, and he did seem to take his time with it, and I so much appreciate that. I mean, even though this is, a hearing for the person accused or one of the people accused in this case, I still, I'm glad he took the time for this. Kendall's life is very much affected by this, and, um, we see this often. So,
It was Cecilia. I just think the world of Cecilia. And when she was walking in, I met her on the outside and she had Jessica's Bible with her. Um, and I wanted to mention that because, that was the most important thing to get back of Jessica's. Like the one thing she wanted was that Bible. And Kendall's grandfather, Ron, found it in the pool house when he was cleaning it out last week and, said, I made sure it got back to her. So it's just like that one, her holding that Bible that, a very caring, sweet family had found and made sure got back to her safely. It just really touched my heart. And when the judge was um, sitting there thinking about it, Cecilia had already told me she was at peace with whatever the judge decided. She, kind of really left to her. They'd prayed on it, and the decision was in the hands of the judge and God. But as he was deliberating on it, I saw her quietly reading Jessica's very, very used and loved Bible.
So used.
Mhm.
There's something in that Bible that I would love to show you sometime, where she basically wrote a list of all the things that she was wanting to be in life for her husband, and she just wanted one thing back, and it was to be loved. Actually, may have a photo of that somewhere that we could put with this, but it they're such a spiritual family, and I think that getting the Bible back signifies that Jessica now is separated from her Bible,
Mhm.
and that kind of made things more real for Cecilia. Um, it's hard to explain. I don't think we could put into words like how their spirituality resonates in their hearts and their family. You really have to live it or experience it or be around it to understand
Just
their
just
authentically.
the peace and strength that I've seen in Cecilia, as she goes through all of these just horrific things most people can never imagine. Um, it very much gives me a good sense of how spiritual she is and how much she trusts in her God.
Well, I mean, in their conversations, Jessica would text her every day and be like, "Hey, mom, I'm feeling this way. Do you have a scripture for this?" And she also witnessed to Kendall and read the Bible with her and prayed for her and with her. And so, I mean, this is just who she was. I
Right.
know in this story, it sounds like she was just like living this crazy love triangle of a life, and this is not really the case.
Mhm.
So much to digest
Yeah.
and still so much to come. There's so much to come in this case. So, there's going to be another hearing. This is going to be what, a preliminary hearing?
Yeah, so the
Expect.
next step is a preliminary hearing, which right now is scheduled for January 10th for all three of them. And that is, I mean, for people that aren't familiar with it, that is like the hearing where they present the specifics of the case to the judge, and the judge determines if there is enough for formal charges. So right now they've just been indicted, and then once they get charged, it starts moving um, through the court system.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely stay tuned for that and we'll update when that happens. Hopefully, I'll be there with you for that. Um, and then where people can go for information on this strangulation law that we've talked about in South Carolina, there's a Facebook
I'm
group that is private. It's called Strangulation Law SC.
SC,
That's
yep.
and you can ask to join that. And
And I'm going to be doing an article sometime today or tomorrow. Today's Tuesday, so it should be up by the latest tomorrow on the bill and on how people who want to support it can get in touch with their legislature.
I hope people that see this that haven't seen your interview with Brian go and watch that too, because there's so much to learn there, and it's very fascinating, actually.
It is, and I'm continually impressed by his fight for this legislation. I think it's been a tough road for him and long overdue, and I'm excited to see it making progress.
Me too. When you learn about this, it will wreck you. It's it's a it's a strong topic. So
Yeah, it is one of those trigger warnings. It's one of those topics that it's so vital to safety, but it is hard.
yep. Well, thank you so much for updating us and keeping up with this case the way that you have, and for being there for all of them, and for Jessica and being her voice. Jen Wood,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
having
If
me.
you or someone you know is affected by domestic violence, please get help. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE.